Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I recently told people not that long ago that I've identified for my bench press right now, which is really my weakest lift out of all my big four, my big five, that my triceps are obviously the weak link in my bench press. And I've had a lot of people ask me how did I identify that. And so we're going to cover some of that here, and then I'm going to explain what I'm doing to fix it. Now, one of the obvious things when you guys watch my bench press as I start ramping up towards a max here, that I'm explosive off the chest. In other words, my chest fires really hard. I have a well-developed chest, and I don't slow down until I get almost to the end of the lockout. And notice when I say the lockout, I don't talk about the middle. A lot of people think that they have a lockout issue on the bench press if it slows in the middle. That's actually usually indicative of a weak chest or weakness off the chest. So in my case, I tend to be very explosive out of the bottom. And that's largely due to two things. Number one, I almost exclusively pause bench. I don't do touch and go. All right, I don't do touch and go. And I'm very chest dominant in terms of my size. In other words, my torso grows very easily, my arms do not. And it's pretty obvious when you guys see me shirtless in some of the shirtless videos and other stuff in the shirtless training that I have a big, thick chest and my arms tend to be lagging, especially my triceps. My triceps do tend to be lagging. And I'm really strong on things like weighted dips and other exercises that use a lot of chest. I'm actually stronger on the weighted dip than I am on the bench in terms of total weight I can move for work sets. And so here we're doing 315, and this is even after me working on my triceps. This is over a month after I started really hammering my triceps, and they've gotten stronger. If you guys remember, as I've been rebuilding after my cut, because I lost quite a bit of strength, my max bench dropped down to 320 just over a month ago. And then after doing some tricep specific work, I've got it up to 335. Well, we'll look in a minute at my press, which you guys will see. But here I am with 335, and this is after increasing it 15 pounds again, and it's going back up. Notice that I'm explosive off the chest. I come down, I sink it, I pause, and it drives right up off the chest. The bar doesn't slow until maybe the top third to a fourth of the rep, which you guys will see here when I do it. So again, I'm explosive and fast off the chest, even with a max. And then right there, slows down. And see that bar path adjusts a little bit? All right, that's indicative of, for me, that my triceps are a little weak. Now, it's not necessarily a true weakness because I didn't miss the rep, but it's still my weak link. But notice just a couple weeks before that, here I am hitting a 225 press with a pause off the chest. All right, normally your ratios, you want your press to be somewhere in the range of 60 up to about 65% of your bench. Well, back closer to the time when I did this, mine was quite a bit different than that, wasn't it? Right? It was different. It was actually, it's around 70%. At that point, 70% of my bench. Again, and I'm able to pause on the chest. A lot of times that press assumes a touch and go off the chest, right? Or a stretch reflex being used. So I'm stronger with anything driving right off the chest than I am up near the lockout in general. So what we're seeing here is a general tricep weakness. And it's based upon visually looking at me. It's based upon watching the bar path, comparing other lifts. And then when we see things like the JM press, I'm relatively weak on something like the JM press, which is an accessory for the triceps for the bench. So let's come over and talk about the strategies I'm going to use, because in my case, it's relatively obvious that it's not my delts are not the weakness. My chest is not the weakness. It's my triceps. Now, I could stand to get everything stronger, and all of us need to always be getting all the muscles stronger. So we wouldn't stop doing our pause bench and other things like that. We just need to add extra work for the triceps. So here's what I'm doing. At this point, recently, I just started adding push presses back in, and this is still going somewhat light, 205 for like 5 sets of 3 after ramping up. Because the push press is a fantastic tricep builder, and some strength and conditioning coaches feel that the push press is one of the best all-around tricep size and strength builders in existence, and particularly if we're going to carry over to compound movements. The push press just lends itself to overall pressing power, and usually a barbell standing press, even the strict press, when it's been studied, when EMG data looks at it, what do we find? It activates the triceps more than the other various overhead presses, like the seated barbell press, the standing dumbbell, or the seated dumbbell press. it tends to, when RPE is similar, it tends to give quite a bit better tricep activation. Well, the push press is even more so in that regard because, again, you're having to use the triceps to finish the movement, locking it out after you use the inertia to take over where a lot of the chest would. And then you have an eccentric overload because you're going to be doing more total workload on the eccentric than you would be able to lift, right? Because your push press numbers, even for like a 3-rep max or 1-rep max or whatever, is going to be heavier than you would be able to do the same number of reps on a concentric only. So you're getting that eccentric overload with a weight that's going to be heavier than you would normally be able to press. So that tends to build a lot of tricep, and because it's overhead in nature, it can actually hit the long head quite a bit. So for an overall size and strength builder for the triceps, the push press, and particularly as it pertains to bringing your full body into an exercise, so again, following through using leg drive, that can carry over in some ways to what we do with the flat bench. So that's one thing that I'm doing. The other thing that I'm putting even more volume into, and I have recently started doing, and I've actually gotten 20 pounds stronger on these, is the JM press. Now, the JM press is a favorite of powerlifters, and this is what I've used to add the last 15 pounds to my bench, and probably, hopefully, we'll get it up another 20, another 30 over time. Ideally, I'd like to get my bench back to 365. As I get lighter, as I get down to 200 pounds again, as I cut more body fat, another 15 to 20 pounds of body fat off, which I have to lose. You guys can see around my waistline there. I want to get my bench back to 365. Well, that's going to require me to really strengthen and thicken up my triceps. Now, the JM press doesn't work the long head as much. It really doesn't, but it's a very specific tricep exercise to the bench press. Why? Because it simulates a combination between either a bench press or a closed grip bench press and a skull crusher. But if you notice, it turns essentially the skull crusher into a compound movement. Turns it into a compound movement that still works the two heads of the triceps the most that are used to lock out your bench press, the lateral and the medial head. But it does so in a way that doesn't inflame the connective tissue as much as a standard skull crusher does. And it also does it as a heavy compound movement. And why is that important? Well, when you start looking at the researchers out there, I mean, we could look at the anecdote of powerlifting, we could look at the anecdote of strength sports, but let's set that aside and let's look at actual scientific literature. What does the literature show us? That muscles get stronger when we do a multi-joint exercise, right? The bench press makes your triceps stronger for the same unit of growth that even a tricep isolation type movement does, a single joint exercise, because we can't really isolate muscles. That's a bodybuilding myth. But that's what happens. The same thing when the squat is compared with the leg extension, that even when the same amount of muscle growth is induced, the squat makes the quad stronger than the leg extension does. And it has to do with learning movement patterns and involving motor unit learning. Well, this is a more awkward version of the bench press. It turns it into a tricep exercise because it's a hybrid. It's like a hybrid between a skull crusher and a bench press. So it allows you to overload with more total weight through a similar range of motion and get that additional shoulder movement involved. So it turns it into a hybrid type press. So what we do here, we're overloading the tricep with a multi-joint exercise that is very, very tricep specific, with a movement pattern that carries over to the way that the triceps move through the bench press on the lockout. So what the tricep itself does is almost an identical replication of the role the tricep plays on the bench press. So what a lot of powerlifters have found is that they get direct carryover. So if they get a lot stronger on the JM press, particularly if they're weak on, say, the top half or the top third of their bench press, it carries over tremendously. They see immediate improvements. So it's a very, very popular exercise. So it makes sense biomechanically why it works. And then you look at historically at the sport of powerlifting itself, and we see that this exercise carries over tremendously. So in my case, since I've identified an overall size and strength deficiency in my triceps on the bench press, what are we doing for it? Well, I'm doing two very, very different heavy multi-joint exercises to remedy it. One of them is considered to be, by strength and conditioning coaches, to be one of the best all-around tricep multi-joint builders because it works all three heads and it works them through an explosive movement that also forces eccentric overloading, which is good for overall hypertrophy. And then I'm adding in a bench press specific accessory movement. So it's a bench press specific accessory movement to address the exact weak areas of performance and thickness in the tricep as it pertains to the bench press. So I'm taking a twofold approach to this, and in my case I'm doing each of these exercises now twice per week with at least 5 sets on each of those workouts, so that my triceps are getting, in terms of additional work outside of my normal benching, they're getting an additional 20 sets every week, an additional 20 sets of big movements that address these 2 different points of it. So that's what I'm doing to improve my bench press, and that's what I'm doing after I've identified it, and it's something that you guys can incorporate also. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.